There is a particular kind of man who enters a ballroom and makes the music quieter simply by being in it. Not because he is loud, because everything else becomes aware of him and adjusts. The Duke of Renmore was that kind of man. And on the night of the 4th of March, 1812, when he walked through the doors of Hartfield House and the candlelight caught the scar along his jaw, every conversation in the room paused for exactly 3 seconds before pretending it hadn't. No one spoke of the scar directly. This was London. Directness was for the provinces. What they spoke of, in careful whispers behind ivory fans and crystal glasses, was everything else. That he had returned from the continent changed. That the man who had left England 4 years ago as its most celebrated son had come back as something no one had a comfortable word for. Dangerous, some said. Ruined, said others. A few, the bravest or most foolish, simply said broken. The Duke of Renmore heard none of it, or heard all of it and had simply stopped caring, which in a man like him amounted to the same thing. He positioned himself at the far edge of the room beside a column that had the dual advantage of being both decorative and defensible, and he watched. Not the dancing. Not the glittering performance of eligible daughters and hopeful mothers that the season required everyone to pretend was something other than what it was. He watched the door. He was waiting for someone, and the someone he was waiting for did not know he was coming. Across the ballroom, near the tall windows that looked out over the Hartfield gardens, stood Miss Cecily Vane. She was speaking to Lady Pembroke with the composed attention of a woman entirely at ease with her surroundings, which was, to anyone who knew the truth of her situation, a performance so flawless it bordered on genius. She was 23. She was well-dressed without being extravagant. She was handsome in a way that required a second look before it became undeniable, the kind of beauty that announces itself quietly and then refuses to leave the mind. What no one in that ballroom knew, what she had spent the better part of 2 years ensuring no one would know, was the letter folded beneath the lining of her evening glove, and the name on that letter was his. She had known he was in London. Word travels faster than coaches when the subject is a duke, especially one with a history as deliberate as Renmore's. And she had known he was expected at Hartfield House. She had come anyway. This was either the bravest thing she had ever done, or the most reckless, and she had not yet determined which. The letter had arrived 14 days ago. 14 days of reading it, refolding it, pressing it flat, and reading it again. 14 days of understanding that everything she had built in his absence, the careful reputation, the quiet usefulness, the 2 years of making herself invisible to precisely the right people, was balanced on a surface considerably thinner than she had allowed herself to believe. The letter was not addressed to her. It never should have reached her hands, and the man who had written it was standing 40 feet away, with his back against a column, looking at the door she had walked through 11 minutes ago. And he had not looked at her yet. She was nearly certain of this. She was also nearly certain that his not looking at her was itself a form of looking. Lady Pembroke said something about the flowers. Cecily agreed, warmly, with the precision of a woman who has learned to hold 2 separate conversations simultaneously, one with her mouth and one entirely inside her own chest, where nobody could hear it. He crossed the room at 9:30. She knew he was coming the way you know, weather before it arrives, a shift in the pressure of things. She did not turn. She let him come to her. "Your Grace." When she finally turned, her voice was exactly as she intended it. Measured. Pleasant. Containing nothing he could use. He looked at her for a moment before he spoke. This was, she would later think, and the first indication that he was not the same man who had left. The Renmore she had known 4 years ago moved through social rooms like water finding its level, effortless, instinctive, never pausing long enough to truly see anything. This man paused. This man looked. "Miss Vane. A beat. You appear well." "I am, thank you. And you, Your Grace, appear returned." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something older than a smile. "I do appear to be, yes." Lady Pembroke, sensing the particular atmosphere of a conversation she was not equipped to understand, excused herself with the graceful efficiency of a woman who has survived 30 seasons by knowing when to leave a room. And then it was just the two of them, inside the noise of the ballroom, which might as well have been silence. "You knew I would be here tonight," he said. It was not an accusation. It was worse than an accusation. It was simply a fact, stated without drama, in the tone of a man who has stopped pretending not to see clearly. "Many people are here tonight. Cecily. Just her name. Nothing attached to it. No title, no courtesy, no careful distance. Just her name in his voice, and the 4 years between them collapsed like a bridge with its supports knocked out, sudden and total, and leaving nothing to walk back across." She held his gaze. It cost her something. She paid it. "I think," she said carefully, "that this is perhaps not the most suitable venue for whatever conversation you believe we need to have." "I agree entirely." He said it without moving, which was how she understood he had no intention of waiting for a more suitable venue. The musicians began a new set behind them. The couples arranged themselves on the floor with the practiced ease of people for whom dancing was the most natural language available. Around Cecily and the Duke of Renmore, the room continued its evening as though nothing significant was occurring, which was, she reflected, precisely how London always treated the things that mattered most. "You have something of mine," he said. She did not answer immediately. Inside her glove, the letter pressed against her palm with the faint warmth of paper that has been held too many times. "I don't know what you mean." He looked at her, and there it was again, that quality of sight that hadn't been there before, the ability to look at something and see through it to the shape beneath. "Yes," he said quietly. "You do." This was the moment she had rehearsed. She had rehearsed it in her room in the grey mornings, in the mirror, in the half-dark before sleep, when her mind refused to be still. She had prepared an answer for this exact moment, composed, deflecting, perfectly calibrated to neither confirm nor deny. She had the words entirely ready. What came out of her mouth was something else entirely. "Why did you write it?" The question landed between them in the noise of the ballroom like a stone dropped into water. She felt the ripple of it immediately, in the slight stiffening of his jaw, the brief arrest of something in his eyes before the composure came back down. "That," he said, "is a conversation that cannot happen here. Then you agree we need to have it?" A pause. Longer than the previous ones. He was not a man, she was learning, who spoke carelessly. Every word was placed, every silence was chosen. "Tomorrow," he said finally. "Grosvenor Square. 11 o'clock. She should have said no. Every sensible, practical, self-preserving instinct she possessed said no. A young woman of no particular fortune and carefully managed reputation did not call upon a duke alone. Not in this city, not in this season, not with a letter in her glove that would, if it were ever properly understood, destroy at least 3 people, and possibly more. She said, "I will be there at 11. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he inclined his head with perfect formality and walked away, and when the ballroom closed around the space he left, and the music continued, and Lady Hartfield's roses were as fragrant as ever, and no one watching would have said anything of consequence had occurred. No one watching understood what she was holding. She arrived at Grosvenor Square at 3 minutes past 11. Precision mattered. Too early suggested eagerness. Too late suggested fear. 3 minutes past suggested a woman entirely in command of her own schedule, which was the impression she needed him to have for as long as possible. The house was larger than she remembered. She had been inside it once, 4 years ago, at a gathering that now felt like it had occurred in another woman's life. The butler received her without expression and showed her to the study, which was a room that smelled of wood smoke and old paper, and the particular staleness of a space that has been lived in by someone who stopped entertaining guests and started simply existing. He was standing at the window when she entered. He turned. She sat in the chair across from his desk without being invited to. She reached into her glove, placed the letter on the desk between them, and looked at him. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he sat down. Then he said, without preamble, without the careful social scaffolding most men of his position would have erected first, "How much of it do you understand?" "Enough," she said. Lord Haverstock was diverting funds from the regimental trust. For 3 years, possibly 4. The money meant for the families of soldiers killed on the continent was redirected into his private accounts, while those families received letters of condolence and nothing else. The room was very quiet. "Widows," she continued, because she had spent 14 days with this letter and she was going to say it plainly. "Children. Women who had been told their husbands died for England and were then left to manage that fact on a clerk's annual income while Haverstock hosted shooting parties in Derbyshire." She looked at him steadily. "That is what the letter contains." Renmore said nothing for a moment. He looked like a man having a conversation he had rehearsed and found, now that it was happening, to be nothing like the rehearsal. "Haverstock is dead," he said. "I know. You wrote to someone after he died. The letter implies you discovered what he had done while you were both on the continent, that you confronted him, that he denied it and you had no proof beyond what you had observed, which was not enough to bring forward without destroying yourself alongside him." She paused. "And that you have spent 4 years deciding what to do with what you knew." He was looking at her with the expression of a man who expected to be managing this conversation and has discovered he is not. "You read it very carefully," he said. "I read it 14 times. A beat. Something shifted in him. Not quite a smile. Something more private than a smile. "Haverstock had a partner," he said. "Someone still living. Someone still in London. Someone who has been very carefully ensuring that the full extent of what they did together remains buried, because Haverstock is dead and conveniently cannot contradict whatever version of events is offered." He looked at her. "That man is Lord Alderton." She had suspected this. She had not been certain. Certainty settled in her chest now like a stone finding the bottom of still water. "And Alderton knows you have the letter," he said. "He knows I have something. He does not know precisely what." She kept her voice level. "He has been making it clear, in the particular way that men like Alderton make things clear, that my continued comfort in London depends on my continued silence about certain matters." "What did he threaten you with specifically?" She looked at him. This was the part she had not planned to say. This was the part that belonged to her alone, that she had carried without telling anyone. That was the most privately costly thing in a situation already full of costs. "My brother," she said. "Edward was at Haverstock's regiment, not as an officer, as a supplier. He provided provisions under a contract arranged through Haverstock's connections, and some of those provisions were invoiced at inflated figures." A pause. Edward did not know where the money was going. He was 22 and grateful for the contract, and did not ask the questions he should have asked. But the invoices have his name on them, and Alderton has the invoices. Renmore was very still. If Alderton chooses to present those invoices without context, without the larger picture of what Haverstock was doing and why, my brother appears complicit in war profiteering. Her voice remained even. It cost her considerably. Edward has a wife. A child born last autumn. He is not a dishonest man. He made a young man's error, and has spent 4 years not knowing it could still find him. She looked at Renmore directly. That is what Alderton is holding, and that is why I've been very quiet and very careful for a very long time. The silence in the study was the kind that has weight and texture. "You came here," Renmore said slowly, "with the one piece of evidence that could expose Alderton's full involvement, the letter that names him as Haverstock's partner. You came here to return it to me, knowing that returning it meant losing the only protection you had." "I came here," she said, "because keeping it felt like becoming Alderton, and I'm not willing to do that." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the fireplace, and stood with his back to her for long enough that she began to wonder if she had miscalculated. Then he turned. I was the one who arranged the original contract for your brother." She stared at him. "Haverstock asked me to recommend reliable suppliers before I understood what he was doing. I recommended Edward Vane because your father and mine had been friends, and I knew your brother was honest and needed the work." His voice was controlled and precise, and underneath it was something that was not controlled at all. By the time I understood what Haverstock was using those contracts to conceal, Edward was already in the invoices, and I was already on the continent with no way to extract him cleanly without making it worse. The full shape of it settled over her. The letter. Renmore's 4 years of silence. The scar. The careful distance he maintained from everyone in the ballroom. It wasn't just guilt about Haverstock. It was this. It was her brother's name in a ledger that Renmore had, however unknowingly, helped to write. "You came back," she said quietly, "because of Edward." "I came back because Haverstock died, and Alderton became the only person alive who knew the complete picture. And because a man like Alderton with that kind of knowledge and no restraining partner is considerably more dangerous than one with a check on his behavior." He met her eyes. "And because I had spent 4 years knowing that an honest young man and his family were exposed because of a recommendation I made in good faith, and I had run out of patience with myself for not fixing it." She sat with this for a long moment. The fire moved in the grate. Outside, a carriage passed on the square. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "What I should have done before I left for the continent," he said. "I'm going to give Alderton a choice. He may leave London quietly, permanently, and the full contents of that letter remain between us. Or he may choose to stay, and I will present the letter, along with testimony from 3 officers still living who observed Haverstock's conduct and will speak to it, to people in a position to act on the information, people who will also note, prominently, that Alderton's role was not peripheral." He paused. "Either way, Edward's invoices will be placed in their proper context before anyone has the opportunity to misuse them. And I've already spoken to 2 men who can confirm the nature of the Haverstock's arrangement and your brother's position within it." She looked at him. This man who had come home to a city that called him broken and had been, quietly, without announcement, doing the most methodical and thorough job of repair she had ever witnessed. "You had already begun," she said, "before I came here. Before you knew I had the letter." "Yes. You were protecting Edward without telling me. Without telling him. I didn't know, when I began, that Alderton had found you. I thought the exposure was theoretical. When I understood what he was actually doing, that he was using your brother as leverage against you specifically, He stopped, looked at the fire, then back at her. "I moved more quickly." She thought about the ballroom, and about him standing at the edge of it, watching the door. She had assumed he was waiting for her because of the letter. He had been waiting for her because he had finally run out of time to protect her from a distance and needed to know how bad it had become. "How long have you known about Alderton and me?" she asked. 6 weeks. She absorbed this. 6 weeks of watching. 6 weeks of knowing what she was carrying and not telling her he knew. She wanted to be angry about this. She examined the feeling carefully and found that beneath the instinct for anger was something more complicated. He had been moving pieces quietly for 6 weeks to protect a woman and a family he owed a debt to. He had not told her, because telling her would have meant admitting his own role in creating the danger, which would have been the easier thing, and the thing that cleared his conscience quickly. He had chosen the harder thing instead. He had simply fixed it. "You are not what London says you are," she said. "London says many things. They say you're dangerous. I am, on occasion. To specific people. They say you're broken." He was quiet for a moment. "That one is closer." She looked at him. At the honest admission of it, which cost him something she could see it cost him, and which he offered anyway. "Things that are broken," she said, "are not the same as things that are finished. That is a distinction people make very carelessly." He looked at her with the expression of a man who has had something said to him that he will be thinking about for a considerable time. They met 6 more times before the end of March. Twice at Lady Pembroke's, Once at the Greystone Library, reading Society, which he joined with a casualness that fooled no one, and 3 times in the study at Grosvenor Square under the perfectly adequate chaperonage of his elderly aunt, who read her novels with magnificent indifference to everything occurring around her. Each conversation went longer than the previous one. This was not planned. It was the natural consequence of 2 people who had begun, cautiously, the way people begin things when they have both been burned before, to find that the other person's mind was the most interesting room they had been in for a very long time. He argued with her. This was unexpected and, she found, deeply satisfying. He did not manage her opinions the way most men managed women's opinions, with the polite, glazed attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, till he actually disagreed, specifically, with reasons. She disagreed back. His aunt turned pages. The fire burned down. She told him about Bath, about the years of making herself useful and unobtrusive and excellent at things that would never be publicly credited to her. He listened with the focused quality of a man who has been away from honest conversation for long enough to understand its value. She told him about Edward's child, a girl named Marjorie with their mother's eyes, and his face did something quiet and private at that. Something that was not about the debt anymore. He told her, one evening in early April, about the night he found out what Haverstock had been doing. They had been at a regimental dinner somewhere in Belgium, and a letter had arrived mid-course, misdirected, and it had been opened by a junior officer who handed it to Renmore thinking it was military correspondence. It was a private accounting, Haverstock's own record of the diverted funds, written to himself with the particular complacency of a man who believes he is untouchable. Renmore had read it at the table, had looked up at Haverstock across the candlelight, had watched the man understand, in real time, that the letter had arrived in the wrong hands. "What did you do?" she asked. "I finished my dinner," he said, which was perhaps the coldest thing I have ever done. And then I walked with him afterward and told him exactly what I intended to do about it. And what did he say? He told me I had no proof beyond a letter that could be dismissed as private accounting fiction. He told me that if I moved against him, he would ensure that certain aspects of my time on the continent, nothing criminal but sufficiently irregular to damage, would become public. He was not wrong about any of it. A pause. And then he died of fever 3 months later before I had found a way through it. And Alderton inherited the secret and none of the restraint. Precisely. She looked at him across the firelight. You have been very alone with this. Yes, that was not necessary. He looked at her. There was no one I trusted enough. A silence. Then quietly, there is now. Lord Alderton received a private communication in the 2nd week of April. It was delivered by hand, unsealed, written in a hand he recognized immediately, and had spent considerable energy cultivating as an ally. He read it once. He read it again. Then he sat in his study for a long time, looking at the window, doing the arithmetic of a man who has just discovered that the ground he has been standing on belongs to someone else. He left London within the fortnight. His health, his servants told inquiring callers, had declined quite suddenly. He relocated to a property in the north of Scotland, which is as close to disappearing as a man of his rank can manage while remaining technically present in the world. He was not heard from again in any relevant capacity. Edward Vane received a letter from his sister in May, telling him that a matter she had been managing quietly on his behalf was resolved, and that he need not concern himself with it, and that Marjorie must be brought to London at the earliest opportunity because her aunt intended to spoil her without mercy. He wrote back with the bewildered gratitude of a man who has been rescued from a danger he didn't fully know he was in, and asked no questions, which was very wise of him. Renmore asked to speak to Mr. Vane Sr. in the 3rd week of May. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Mr. Vane emerged from it looking like a man who has received information that required him to substantially revise his understanding of several things simultaneously. He found his daughter afterward in the garden, where she was reading with the particular composure that had always distinguished her. He sat beside her. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "He told me everything." I know, she said. I asked him to. Her father looked at her. You could have told me yourself. You would have tried to manage it, she said, not unkindly. He was better positioned to resolve it, and I needed it resolved, not managed. Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Do you love him? She looked at the garden, at the wisteria beginning its slow, patient climb along the stone wall, at the particular quality of Maylight that makes everything look like it is being seen for the first time. I think, she said carefully, that I love the person he is becoming, and I think he is becoming it faster than he would alone. A pause, as that seems like a reasonable foundation. Her father considered this. Then he said, It is a better foundation than most. They were married in September, a quiet ceremony, because Renmore had no patience for spectacle, and Cecily had spent enough of her life performing for audiences. The study at Grosvenor Square became, as autumn settled over London, the room they returned to most reliably. He reading. She reading. The particular silence of two people who have stopped managing each other and started simply existing in the same space, which is its own form of fluency. He learned to argue with her and lose gracefully. She learned to let him be quiet without filling the quiet with questions. He started laughing again, not the controlled social production the ballroom had occasionally witnessed, but the real version, sudden and unguarded, of the kind that arrives when someone has said exactly the right, unexpected thing. She discovered that the most dangerous thing about him had nothing to do with the scar or the continent or the darkness London attributed to him. The most dangerous thing about him was that once he decided to love something, he was entirely without moderation about it. She found this, on balance, to be not dangerous at all, only true. He told her once, very late on an evening in December, that he had walked into Hartfield House that March night prepared to retrieve a letter and close a chapter, and return to the careful, isolated life he had constructed for himself and considered adequate. And instead, she said, he looked at her across the firelight, and at the woman who had placed a letter on his desk and told him exactly what it contained, and exactly why she was returning it, without flinching, without asking for anything in return. Instead, he said, I met someone who looked at a broken thing and saw the distinction between broken and finished. She smiled. The full version, the one she had stopped rationing. You were never finished, she said. You were just waiting for the right room to open the windows in. He reached for her hand. He held it with the ease of a man who has learned, later than most but more completely than many, that the bravest thing a person can do is simply stay. Outside, December moved through London in its grey and patient way. Inside, the fire did its work. Some men come home from the continent carrying secrets that would have been easier to leave buried. Some women carry other people's safety in their evening gloves and say nothing, because saying something has never yet been an option the world made available to them. And some stories begin with a letter that was never meant to be found and end, if the two people involved are honest enough and brave enough and willing enough to be precisely seen in a quiet room with the windows finally open. This was one of those stories. If this one stayed with you, if you have ever been the person who protected someone quietly and asked for nothing back, leave us a comment and tell us. Subscribe to the Duke channel. Come back next week. The next story begins with a secret that was kept for 20 years, and the woman who finally speaks it has been waiting just long enough to know exactly what to say.